All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining today. My name is Kara Runston. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the MVP Program Director. I am going to be leading you through this session on MVP 2.0 today. So for an agenda, I'm going to go over a bit of an overview of the 2.0 program. I'm going to talk about some of the administrative details for this upcoming round. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Bill Hinckley, who's going to talk briefly about the grants management system that we will be utilizing to submit applications this round. So this is a different system than we have used in the past. So we want to get you signed up and accommodated with that. And then we'll have a session for Q&A that some of my colleagues will help facilitate. So just some notes on the webinar. We're going to record this session and post it for those that aren't able to make it, or so you can refer back to it at a later date. And then we also are going to be using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for any questions that you have. So as they come up throughout the presentation, feel free to add your questions there. And folks will from my team will either answer them there or we will save them for the Q&A discussion. And if we don't get to your question, please follow up with us and we'll be happy to respond offline. So first, I just want to start with what is MVP 2.0. So it's a program that continues to support Massachusetts communities in increasing resilience to climate change by building off of and filling gaps from the 1.0 program. And it focuses specifically on climate resilience priorities through an equitable and inclusive lens, and also building out and implementing these priorities. So bridging that gap between planning and action. What it does is it convenes a community team to do equitable climate resilience work. It provides training on strategies for building resilience, equity, and climate justice. It revisits resilience priorities with the involvement of the wider community. It helps the municipality and the community co-develop and implement a project, which we call a seed project. And it provides a process that could be replicated for future action grants. We'll get more into, specifically who is eligible and all of that, but generally eligible entities are municipalities, tribal governments, and political subdivisions like regional planning agencies that are applying on behalf of a municipality or a group of municipalities. So how is 2.0 different than the original planning grant process? So many of you on the line, I'm sure, are from communities that have done our original planning grant process, and you're wondering what is 2.0? So it's different because it's not a traditional planning process. So instead of actually having a plan at the end of this, you're really going to have a list of priorities that you've been building out with the broader communities. We, again, are going to be expanding community involvement through this process, and I'll talk about how that happens. We're going to dive deeper into social resilience. We're going to focus on translating priorities into action, again, bridging that gap between planning and action. And it also trains a community team to do this work. So it's not just municipal staff or, sort of their usual partners, but really reaching out into the community and getting others involved and building capacity to do climate resilience work. So this slide shows the process via a graphic. So you'll see that there are 3 phases, and I'll walk through each of them briefly. But this is just an overview. So the first 2 phases, developing a core team and revisiting resilience priorities, are going to take about the first year of this 2-year process. And then the third phase is implementing the seed project, and that is also going to take about a year. So those are the 2 years of the process. We have lots of different tools and resources that you'll be utilizing throughout the process. And in particular, there's a document called the process guide, and that really walks through all of these steps in a lot of detail. So we can get into that in a deeper way by reading through that. So in terms of phase one, developing a core team, there's a few different components here. So the first component is that every municipal tribe, every municipality, tribe, or regional partnership will get paired with an equity partner that my agency, EEA, hires. So you don't have to do the procurement for that. We will pair you with that person right from the start of the process. The equity partner will be supporting the process and will be a resource for the team in thinking about equity and in climate justice in particular. And they'll be leading a lot of sessions that focus on the learning series and trainings to build up those skill sets in the communities. The second kind of component of building out the core team is selecting a planning vendor. So this is where the municipal lead will actually be using the grant funding to hire a planning vendor. So you'll be doing the procurement process for that. We have some tools to help folks do that. So we have a list of qualifications and a sample RFP for folks to use. We also have a list of vendors that have expressed interest in being a planning vendor for the 2.0 process. Some of the skills that we're looking for in the planning vendor and that are highlighted in those resources are on this slide. So equity-centered project facilitation, community-driven process experience, and climate and community resilience experience. This is just some of the tasks of the planning vendor. You'll see lots of different things, including project management, helping to recruit the core team, coordinating a lot of the logistics, and moving people through the process. Things to keep in mind, the list of MVP certified providers that was provided for the original MVP planning grant program has been retired, so you can retire that list. To help you with selecting a planning vendors, again, we'll provide you with a list who have indicated interest, as well as the sample RFP and qualifications. Just want to note that being on the list doesn't guarantee that the vendor is qualified. It's just folks that have expressed interest to us and listened to a training that we gave. So communities should still vet any vendors on the list with the qualifications provided. Also note that in step 9, which is implementing the seed project, the communities may hire an additional implementation vendor to implement that part of the project. It could be your planning vendor, or if there's different expertise needed, you might be hiring a different type of vendor. And then the last component is the core team. So the core team, actually, I'll go to the next slide. So who's on the core team? The core team is roughly 10 people, with approximately half being community liaisons and half being municipal staff and partners. So community liaisons are individuals from or with strong connections to environmental justice and other priority populations. And you'll see what we define priority populations as at the bottom of this slide. And those individuals will be compensated with grant funding for their time in the process. And then municipal staff and partners could include folks that work in areas like planning, housing, public works, conservation, health, or social services. I mentioned this before, but there are a lot of resources related to MVP 2.0. So this just shows some of the resources that are related to this first phase of the project. So you'll see the social resilience roadmap, and then it's also worth noting that we have an online tool called GEAR, or Guides for Equitable and Actionable Resilience, and that will be utilized throughout the process, including in this first phase. But that is available on our website, and you're free to click around or utilize it for action grants or other things as well. Things to keep in mind are that the community liaisons can be paid directly by the municipality through the grant funding, or paid through the contract with the planning vendor, probably as a sub consultant. If you plan to pay the community liaisons directly, you may want to consider working with human resources now to coordinate how that would be set up, because we've seen that that can take a long period of time. So we have been developing some videos that involve the pilot communities from 2.0 that explain a lot of these different phases. And so I'm really excited to do the world premiere here today and let you all see these videos. I'm hoping that the sound works, so we'll see right now. But I think they kind of describe how this all works, and in this case, who the community liaisons are in a better way than I can just verbally. So let's watch the first video.
My name is Charlie Hernandez.
My name is Asma Gilani.
My name is Joella, tar button and a hyphen in Springfield, like the town. And they call me Jada.
Hi, I'm Matt Jennings.
My name is Paulina Shaker.
And I'm community liaison for Time Acting.
I am specifically the community liaison that works with students.
The community liaison for the MVP program out here in Sudbury, Massachusetts.
I am volunteer at the Abington Food Pantry, and I help the team gather some information from the Brazilian community over here because I'm a Portuguese speaker.
I live in the beautiful town of Acton, and recently I've been working as a community liaison.
What's a community liaison? A community liaison is someone who has strong connections with people in the community who are not often involved in town planning processes. In MVP 2.0, each project team has community liaisons who are from or have strong connections to environmental justice and other priority populations who may be most impacted by climate change. Throughout the project, a community liaison makes sure that the project team is connecting with and learning from the ideas, needs, and concerns of others in the community.
So the community liaisons, I feel they're very important to this project because we're able to kind of unearth and hear from members of the community that we don't normally hear from, that don't normally participate in government, being that they're a student or they're a non-English speaker. And it's very important to hear all of those voices when you're making decisions about climate change and the future of our community.
Just in general, students, especially like high school or younger, might not always have the opportunity to reach out to government officials in our town. And through MVP 2.0, some of their thoughts and their ideas are being able to be heard because they have somebody to go through to get to that level, which is quite unique and one of the best features MVP 2.0 has, especially for the younger generation, because oftentimes they might not get heard.
What's the role of a community liaison? A community liaison reaches out to others in the community, learns about their experiences, gets their perspective and input on certain ideas, and invites them to attend or participate in events or activities. Most importantly, a community liaison helps to make sure that the project or planning process reflects what they learn from talking to others in the community.
We kind of act as like communicator, a connector for the town. And my role has been really fun, actually. I've actually enjoyed myself. So we go to potlucks, we'll go have a meeting in the playground, we'll go talk to people and try to understand, especially after identifying certain vulnerable populations, we try to figure out what are the things that might be important for us to know and maybe relate to the town as far as when we want to develop that climate action plan, is everybody represented? So I think through this position, the role that we've played is to get everybody to understand the other person's point of view.
I had the privilege of participating of the interviews at the Abington Food Pantry, so it was better than I expected. I could talk with a lot of people and they could share their thoughts about the problems, about the climate change that the town have, and I could get a lot of feedback. And I didn't expect that, like, people having a way to solve problems like the way that I had on that day.
What's the value of the community liaison model?
From my perspective, being in the town for 4 years now, I've been a part of a lot of community outreach activities, and it's often like so hard to get a diverse set of people in the room. And we're constantly trying to figure out how can we better reach out to the population, how can we get greater representation at the table and more perspectives. And this unique process of hiring and paying for time spent by people in the community really does make it possible to bring in new voices and actually paying people for their time and their commitment. Because at the end of the day, it is a job. It's a job to reach out to the community. It's a job to provide your perspective. And it's an excellent model, and I think it's one that we're going to apply in other initiatives as well.
I think the MVP 2.0 program is successful because it provides a new way for community members to be a part of policy and change in their own town, which is really crucial for democracy as a whole. And I think we've been really successful in generating feedback and responses to our questions and see what the community really feels about the climate. And as well as for me personally, it's really opened my eyes to other perspectives in the community. I think that's really crucial as well, because before this, I had considered other populations that I wasn't familiar with, like renters or the elderly. And I think even that, considering that and even taking the time to think about these things is really just one step in the right direction.
All right. So that was our little video about community liaisons. Hopefully it was informative and inspiring to you all as you're thinking about potentially kicking off a 2.0 process yourselves. So now I'm going to move on to phase 2, and don't worry, there's also a video for this, although I might cut it a little bit shorter. So in phase 2, you'll be spending about 5 months revisiting your resilience priorities. So the first step is kicking off collaboration. So for this, we'll be holding a dinner and a movie night in the town or community to watch the MVP 2.0 kickoff videos, which are actually different videos than those, but maybe you'll watch these as well, and get to know each other and build skills for working together. The next component is what we call uncovering social resilience. So you'll be investigating community and climate data, designing engagement activities, and holding conversations with community members, and compiling that information to understand what shapes vulnerability and resilience in the community. Finally, you'll be resetting priorities, so updating the community resilience priorities from your first planning grant process based on what you've learned from the community, and vetting those priorities with the community. Lots of resources, again, for this phase of the process. I won't get into all of them, but we will definitely get into all of them if you are awarded a grant and move forward with this. You'll also have facilitated discussions with your equity partner that, again, you'll be paired with at the beginning of the process. They'll be exploring topics with you like lived expertise, inclusive engagement, social vulnerability, and climate equity, and monitoring and measuring equity. So now I have a little video about community engagement.
As a part of the MVP 2.0 program, project core teams have been conducting outreach to learn from community members about the factors that contribute to vulnerability and their hopes for the future. And they've been finding fun and creative ways to do so. Most importantly, they've been focused on hearing from people who historically haven't been involved in municipal planning processes and creating new ways for their input and perspectives to shape community planning decisions.
I take an AP environmental science class, so my teacher and I ran a project with some of my peers, and through that I was able to kind of gather the thoughts of my classmates and share it with the MVP community on what kids of my age are thinking and what our thoughts for the future are, such as more renewable sources in the community and just more renewable sources in areas that you might not expect.
So to broaden the work of the traditional MVP committee, we've brought engagement activities to family network events and community events. So the Sudbury Family Network had a summer spectacular. We went there, we had an ice competition where people had to interact with ice, and while the kids were using the ice, the parents were giving us feedback on areas where we could become a more climate resilient town. And then here at AppleFest, we're doing something similar where we've got a booth set up where we've got composting for some of the food waste at the event, and also have our boards for people to provide feedback as they come by from here or other different events.
I think we've talked to about 65 people already that we wouldn't normally get just by having this survey or just by having a climate-focused workshop. In addition to that, we're partnered with our health department. Our health director is a part of our core team, and they've been doing flu clinics for the past 2 weeks. We've been going to those flu clinics, right, where people are already signed up, already thinking about health. We want to combine that, right, health and climate change, health and climate resilience, try to layer those two things together. So that's been really great. Through those flu clinics, we've been able to interact with about 50 people so far. But yeah, just really trying to get to where people already are and interact with them that way, make it easier, not make them come to us, but we'll take all this, we'll come to them, we'll make it easier to get that feedback.
All right, I'm going to cut that one off there just to make sure we have enough time at the end for questions. But you can get some idea of some of the kind of interesting, innovative community engagement that our core teams have been working on through the 2.0 process. So now we reach step 3. This is about implementing a seed project. So again, this is about a year of the 2-year process. You might be wondering, what is a seed project? So it's a project that's selected by the core team that will jumpstart or advance the community's climate priorities. And that can be completed in around 9 to 10 months. Communities will receive $50,000 as part of the grant funding to complete the seed project. So first you'll be selecting the seed project. So you'll be identifying a few potential projects that could support your resilience priorities and then vetting that with the community. You'll then develop an implementation plan for the seed project. You'll implement the seed project. And then the final step of the whole 2.0 process is bringing the core team back together and reflecting on the process and integrating learnings for the future. Lots of resources again for the seed projects. I would also note that we have our new climate resilience playbook that we put together with MAPC, who is the lead, and PVPC, and we'll be pointing folks to that for ideas for seed projects as well. So we're very excited about that additional resource. All right, so I have a video about seed projects.
Municipalities participating in the MVP 2.0 program receive $50,000 to complete a seed project. A seed project is a small project or a phase in a project that can be completed in roughly 9 months and that will help jumpstart or make progress toward your community's climate resilience goals. It's also a great way to practice developing a community resilience project that then makes your community more prepared to apply for MVP action grants. Communities throughout the Commonwealth have launched exciting projects to build community resilience.
My name is Liz Lounsbury, and I am on the Windsor MVP 2.0 team.
I'm Madeline Scully. I'm the town administrator for Windsor and on the MVP 2.0 team.
Our seed project is to repurpose about 100 acres of town-owned property into an educational forest, which would also be encompassing our old landfill.
So there's something for everyone. We're going to have studies on the river. We'll have studies on hardwood forests, on new growth. You can do elementary school or high school programs or college programs and forestry programs at the vocational school. The fire department has already looked at using it for their classes and their training. People are excited, which has kept us excited.
Meanwhile, the town of Cohasset is focusing on the intersections between food justice, social services, and sustainable land management. Their seed project builds community resilience by bringing together community partners to promote sustainable home gardening while coordinating around community food needs.
Hello, I'm Cassandra Thayer. I'm the town planner for Cohasset. So this project has really initiated community climate resilience by bringing people together. A lot of these issues that we've talked about throughout the project, whether it be food insecurity or problems with modes of transportation, have really been siloed up until this point, and so now we're bringing people together. We have the food pantry working with a clothing exchange program. We're working with the housing authority. So eventually our goal is to create a coalition of all of these key community members to work together for the community at large.
My name is Beverly Love. My last name is Rock, and I am a resident of Cohasset, Massachusetts.
The team is excited about this project because
We are finally seeing something come into fruition. You know, we've been working for almost 2 years now, trying to figure out a way we can get more fresh foods into our local food pantry and into the homes of people who need it. We are finally making that happen. We are finally getting attention brought to the food pantry, which is a big deal because a lot of people we have spoken to didn't even know the food pantry existed until we brought it to light, so that's a big deal. And it's good for our community to know the resources that we have because we are in need of them.
Other communities throughout Massachusetts have used their seed project funding to set up a climate resilient affordable housing trust, to build window inserts that can reduce energy bills for renters and homeowners, to create a climate-focused youth leadership program, and to plant trees and expand access to green space. In many of these cases, core teams ended up choosing projects that were quite different from what they first thought they would focus on, once they had spent time talking to residents and learning about community resilience needs. We look forward to seeing what your community embarks on.
All right. Excuse me. I have a tickle in my throat right now. So I will try to get through that so without coughing too much. So in terms of grant deliverables, they are listed on this screen, and you'll be basically, excuse me, submitting them throughout the process and then also through the 2 submission forms that are detailed at the bottom of this slide as well. But we'll walk you through all of this, of course. In terms of details and timeline, again, I already went through who is generally eligible. We encourage regional applications. And the municipalities on the next slide, I'm going to talk about are required to apply in order to maintain eligibility for action grants. And then we also are encouraging any other interested communities to apply because there will likely be several other slots for non-required communities. In terms of funding, you'll get $50,000 from us to complete steps 1 through 8 and 10, and $50,000 to implement step 9 or implementing the seed project. Again, it's a 2-year grant and there's no formal match commitment, although it does require a lot of time and commitment from the municipal staff and others that are involved in the process. In terms of a timeline, we hope to release the RFR in just a few days. We will have a Q&A period where you can submit questions to us, and we'll respond via the Combise system. The applications will be due in December, and then projects would start early next calendar year and end in December of 2027. You will be submitting applications through the new grants management system, which again, I'll let Bill talk about in just a second. And some other notes is that applicants are still able to apply for MVP action grants at the same time. And MVP will take compliance with the MBTA Communities Act into account when awarding grants. So this is a slide that just shows the communities that need to apply this round, and this is based on the date that they completed the original planning grant program. So we're slowly rolling the process out to all of the communities in the state, starting with the earliest folks that finished the first plan. We also have a handful of folks in the box on the right that didn't apply last round but needed to. They won't get the same level of priority as the folks on the left, but we still encourage those folks to apply because we want them to be eligible for action grants. In terms of the application, it's pretty straightforward. There's about 6 questions. It involves a letter of commitment from the chief official, which I think is probably the hardest thing to coordinate on the whole application. It also asks why the community is interested in 2.0, description of environmental justice or other priority populations, and how they will be centered in the process. Any challenges the community has faced moving from planning to action, a description of other ongoing grants and the capacity to take on this process, and then any translation or interpretation needs. If your community feels like they have already done a process very similar to 2.0. There's also a way to request designation for prior work or a modified scope through the application process as well. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Bill.
Good afternoon. So the applications for this year for the MVP 2.0 will be accepted through the grants management system at EEA. If you've already used this system for a different grant application, no further action is needed at this time. If you have not yet used the grant management system, it's really quick and easy to apply, and we use a tool called MyMassGov. MyMassGov is a statewide application that allows users to access about 20 different applications with the same username and same password and same multi-factor authentication. So to sign up, you'll simply go to MyMassGov and select a business account. Next, please. We'll be sharing these slides, and this will be available on the recording. But you can visit the Grants Management System page on the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs for instructions on how to sign up for your MyMassGov account and how to get an account with the GMS. We have an instructional playlist on YouTube, and you can see our user guide at our GMS portal at the help link below. So, and once you have signed up for this, next please. I'm sorry. Once you have signed up for this, the grant application, you'll be able to apply for a grant. You'll be able to upload your required documents. And once your grant has been approved, you'll be able to upload requests for reimbursement and your deliverables that were described by Kara in the earlier slides. The sign-up process should be very quick. And again, if you already have an account, you'll be able to apply for the MVP 2.0 through your existing portal. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions towards the end of the program.
Thank you, Bill. Appreciate that. All right, well, we have reached the Q&A section of the program, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and then I will turn it over to Hillary King to help facilitate.
Hi everyone, I'm Hillary King. I'm the Central Regional Coordinator for the MVP grant program, and looking through some of the questions in the Q&A, Kara, maybe we'll start with some clarification on the planning vendor. This person wants to know if the planning vendor is part of the core team and working with the municipality, the equity partner, and EEA as you go through the orientation, data gathering, uploading goals, etc.
Yes, I think you can think of this person as part of the core team, but they are ultimately the consultant, so they don't have maybe the same like decision-making authority as the rest of the core team. Because obviously we would defer to the community for their priorities, but they're sort of the project manager, if you will, that would be shuttling folks through the process and gathering the core team.
Great, thanks. Another question is asking how this grant differs from a climate action and implementation plan that might be devised for the Eco One Stop.
So it probably would overlap somewhat, especially on the resilience and adaptation side of things. We actually don't fund climate action plans through MVP anymore for action grants, exactly because of that, because we don't want to be funding you twice to do the same thing. And so our requirement for 2.0 is what we would advocate for in terms of coming up with your priorities for resilience in your community.
Great. Bill, maybe I'll tag on this GMS question. Do I understand that the GMS is a different portal to the ECO portal?
This will be the same portal. Now, if you submitted an expression of inquiry for your Eco One Stop, that is now closed, but that's going to be a little bit different. But this will use the same application portal for your full application to your Eco One Stop, as well as your MVP 2.0 grant application.
Thanks, Bill. Some questions around the funding. This person wants to know if the $50,000 for the first steps includes contracts with your planning vendor.
Yes.
And then will both the planning phase and the seed project phase receive $50,000 each for a $100,000 total?
Yes, that's correct. And we also have a sample budget that we provide to folks once they get started to help kind of show what all of the funding goes to.
Great. And a few questions about, I guess, eligibility. One person wondering how many grants are available. I think the point of this question is more we have a required set of communities that need to apply this year, and wondering maybe if there's still a possibility to receive grants if they're not in that particular subset of folks that are required to apply.
Yeah, it's a great question. We definitely encourage you to apply. I think I mentioned that it's a pretty easy application process. We probably will have slots for at least a couple extra communities. And so if you are interested or it aligns well with other things you're doing in town, definitely apply and we'll see if we can accommodate you. I can't make any assurances, obviously, but it is pretty likely that we would be able to award some that are off of the list.
Great. And another person is wondering how the core team model approach is scaled for low capacity, smaller communities. They suggest that it doesn't seem like the model would work for a small community with few staff, volunteer boards, and no local nonprofit organizations. But I know we've had many rural communities participate so far. If anyone has any thoughts for this viewer.
Yeah, I would open that up to RCs or Oleander if anybody had thoughts about that.
Jump in quickly. Hi, I'm Emma Sass. I'm the regional coordinator for the Berkshires and Hilltowns, so this applies to almost all of my communities. I think two things I want to mention. There's some flexibility with the funding that when we talk about municipal core team members and community liaisons in towns where it might be that the town administrator is the only person on the core team who actually is a staff member. Otherwise, folks are volunteers or have other municipal connections, but they're not paid for any of that work. They can be compensated with grant funding as well. And so that funding for your core team members can support not just the community liaisons, depending on the situation. Sorry. And then the other thing I would mention is that we've also seen regional projects really help to bolster community capacity in this way. So currently in my region, there's two different MVP 2.0 pairs of towns, so they don't have to have each town provide an entire core team's worth of people. They can kind of combine and bring their the take advantage of the overlapping needs and resources and connections between communities to fill out a core team in a way that takes some of the burden off of each town.
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, and you answered the next question is a regional approach to MVP 2.0 an option? And then I might pass over again. There's a difference in budget when communities join on a regional effort, and Kara, if you can share what that might look like.
Sorry, I was having a hard time finding my mute button. Yes, there is additional budget provided for regional projects because obviously it will require more coordination. So that sort of planning part of the budget is boosted a bit, and then each community would receive $50,000 for the seed project. So that's also kind of an interesting incentive, I guess, to do a regional project, because if you choose to do one project as a region, you would have a lot more funding to put towards it.
This person has a question. They just received an MVP action grant, but are due to participate in 2.0 and are wondering if it might be a heavy lift for a small town to do both 2.0 and an action grant at the same time. I know we've seen some folks do that, and it is possible, but if anybody has any other thoughts for this viewer.
Yes, I mean it would, for a small town, it probably would be a little bit intense to be doing an action grant and 2.0 at the same time, depending on what it is. But that being said, I guess I don't know the specifics about this town or the grant. So if the grant was for 1 year, then you'll probably be mostly done with the action grant by the time that 2.0 really ramps up. And then if not, like at least you will have kind of started the action grant process and probably be well underway by the time that the 2.0 starts up. I would perhaps caution against, I guess, applying for another action grant in the next round if you're worried about capacity, because then you might have 3 projects, which might be too much. So just thinking about that when you're doing it.
Yeah, that's great advice. A couple easier questions. This one person is wondering if our communities who did not apply for 1.0 eligible for MVP 2.0.
Yes, there are only 1 or 2 communities that applies to, but yes, they are eligible for 2.0 and they would do 2.0 instead of 1.0.
Yeah, and maybe I missed it on the slide too, but there's a question asking if we know when the grant application submittal deadline is yet. If we might just review real quick for folks what the
Yeah, it's going to be probably in December. I think it's going to be around 6 weeks after it gets posted. So depending on when that is.
Let's see. What kinds of support goes towards translation needs from MVP, either literal translation assistance or funding?
Good question. So for funding wise, I can say that there is a question on the application that asks you for the amount of money that you would need to be able to adequately do translation and interpretation for 2.0. So I would encourage you to really kind of like think about that and plan that out and request the funding that you would need for that. And then in terms of other supports, not sure, Oleander, if there's any other supports that are available through the EJ office or anything like that.
I was just sneezing. We're still on the translation question.
Correct. Yep.
I think that if a community runs up against some translation needs, that we can always see what resources that we can use in our toolbox.
And I think that's something that the equity partners can also help with, figuring out some strategies for how make sure that everything is being reached to everyone.
And also, I'll just add to that as well that some of our core process documents have already been translated into a number of languages, so you all won't be responsible for that part.
Yeah. And if there is another document that you would need or something, you could just let us know and we will figure out how to make that happen.
It's another common question on funding. Can one apply all of the funds to town staff and not retain a planning vendor?
No, that is not possible.
Yeah, MVP is not able to fund town staff positions, right?
Yeah, we are capital budget funded, and so our funds can't be going to operating costs of municipalities.
Looking at some questions on community liaisons, this one person's wondering if there are any requirements on how to select or hire the community liaisons.
Does anybody else want to take that one?
Yeah, and I guess this could be looked at two ways. You know, I think our process guide shows several steps in how to look at who's in your community and identify who you might want to bring on in the conversation. And then there are also discussions you might have with your planning vendor or your local staff to figure out how these payments might be able to happen. Let's see. Somebody asked if we could go over the list of types of priority populations, or maybe it'd be easier to send it out in an email if you want to send that.
Yeah, I'm happy to just go back to that slide quickly if that's helpful. I can find it quickly. But I'll just put it up on the screen for a few minutes if we want to do it that way.
Yeah, I think that'd be great.
How do I share my screen? Let's see. There we go.
Meanwhile, from Gosnold, someone is asking if the planning vendor could be a local community member if qualified.
Yes, that is definitely possible.
Great. Can a municipality apply individually and as part of a regional coalition?
No.
Kind of slowing up. There's a few particular ones that I might suggest folks send us an email either to mvp@mass.gov or to your regional coordinator if you know who they are. Let's see. More on the regional process. Could we give some additional information about the mechanics of a multi-town application? One lead community that submits the application, etc.
Yeah, so one community could submit the application. Another way that it could work is that, for example, if you want to work with a regional planning agency, they could submit that application on behalf of the multiple communities that are applying together. I would just say that for like the letter of commitment, for example, we would just be looking for a letter of commitment from each of the communities involved. But otherwise, it's a pretty similar application process.
And maybe we can just look at the slide again too on kind of the overall benefit of MVP 2.0. There's a comment in here from someone who did 1.0, received a one action grant, and are curious what the benefit of doing it all again might be.
Yeah, I'm happy. I think this slide probably is the most applicable to that. But definitely in terms of 2.0, the main difference from 1.0 is really this focus on social resilience and building capacity within the town to do this work. And so I think we've seen that a lot of folks are feeling good about the fact that there's other community members that are involved here that are interested in doing projects with them. I think sometimes it can feel, a little lonely as a municipal staff person working on climate resilience and maybe not having a ton of other folks that are doing the work in town. So it kind of builds that out. And then it also is helpful for applying to action grants, I would say. You go through a process of community engagement and things that you can use those worksheets again when you're trying to build out an action grant, a competitive action grant project for MVP. So it's kind of like doing a mini action grant through the seed project. And then the idea would be that that would spur future action grants to build out that priority or others as well. But curious if anybody else has anything to add on this question.
I will just add that we've seen some kind of trickle over from this process so that I don't know if this is a selling point up front or just kind of hearing from communities who've gone through this that having a core team of, of folks who are engaged in this work has informed other planning processes in town, has informed other ways of community, of working with the community or communicating across the town. It's kind of like shifted the conversation in different spaces that was unexpected. And so I think that's been something interesting to hear from not kind of outside of the MVP pipeline, that it has informed other processes as well.
Yeah, and I would just add to that too. We're already kind of starting to see the impacts of 2.0 on action grant success. We had several towns from the pilot round apply for action grants this most recent past round. Got awarded action grants, and I think a few of them it was their first time ever receiving an action grant. And they like directly alluded to 2.0 in their application. And we could really just like see the connections of how this process helped to build out a very competitive action grant project in the end.
Lots more questions about the regionalization of the 2.0 process. And I think maybe, again, a little confusion on, our prioritization list and the availability of potential additional funds for folks who aren't on that list. So I guess if towns want to regionalize, but only one town is on the priority list, could they still apply? I think the answer would be yes, but maybe they would want to be the lead applicant. I don't know if that's important either.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, is that potentially they would be the lead applicant. And I would hope that we could accommodate the whole group, but if for some reason we could only accommodate the lead community or something, we would figure that out at a later date. I wish I could give you like exact specifics on how many folks could be squeezed in that weren't on the list, but it really just depends on how many folks apply and all of that. So it's a little bit hard to say.
Hillary, I'm wondering if we should answer this question about the earlier grant rounds seem to be in the 90 to 100K range. It seems like there's some confusion around how much funding is received for the whole process versus like the first part and the second part.
Yeah, I mean it's currently 50,000 for everything but the seed project, and then 50,000 for the seed project, so it's 100,000. You also have the opportunity to request additional funding for translation and interpretation, as I mentioned before, so that would be on top of any just that baseline funding.
Right, and there would be a little extra if you have more than one community.
Right, that's correct. Yep.
If you're doing a regional process.
And we would be giving 50,000 for the seed project for each of those communities as well.
Right.
Yep.
think that's most of the questions, if not all. See if anything else rolls in, and then maybe give people 5 minutes.
Yeah, that was pretty good timing. Um,
I think maybe there's one more that could be helpful to folks. This person is asking or saying their community needs to apply next year, but as MVP 2.0 is a 2-year process, it would seem to make sense to apply in this round. Is that correct? If you want to talk about like the requirement timing piece.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question, but if you know the answer to it, feel free to say it.
Sure. It sounds like they are required, they're anticipating being required next round, but wondering if they should be applying this round. So if you got a requirement notification for this round, those are the municipalities or the tribes or RPAs or whatever that are prioritized for this round. And then we usually have funding to fund a few additional voluntary towns. So if you are feeling so inclined to apply this round, but you're not required, there's a chance you might not be funded this round, but for the most likely you will be funded during your required round, if that round would be next year, if that makes sense.
Right. Yep. Yeah,
And you
you're free to apply whenever you would like, but you'll get priority in the round that we tell you that you have priority, basically. But yeah, Emma.
I was going to say MVP 2.0 is a 2-year process, but if you're going through it, you are still eligible for action grants.
Right.
So you don't have to finish 2.0 in order to be eligible for action grants. So if you do it on your required year, that's fine. You're eligible kind of throughout that process.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to do it early for any reason. All right. Well, I think we're basically at the top of the hour, so I guess we can cut it off there. If we didn't answer your question for some reason, just send us an email. I'll be happy to respond. Again, we're hoping to post the application in the coming days, so we'll send out a notification to our listserv then, and the recording should be available within a couple days on our website. So thank you so much. Again, if you have any additional questions about 2.0, we want to make sure it's easy and straightforward for you to apply. So please reach out to us or your regional coordinator directly, and they'd be happy to talk to you more. All right. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate your time and have a great day.